Welcome back to Sonic Speed Reading. And man, I am torn about this one. I know we've been in the year of Shadow and all that, but Knuckles is 30 years old now. And gotta be real with you, I'm a bit disappointed in the celebration this boy has gotten this year. Hell, I'm disappointed in my own celebrations. This is Knuckles November when I'm releasing this, and well, it's the only Knuckles video I'm going to be releasing because, as you might have seen, I was not super happy with the Knuckles show, and while I did enjoy it a lot more and for its own reasons, I overall am not incredibly impressed with the Knuckles 30th anniversary comic. Before I keep talking about hedgehogs, been a while since I spoke about Spider-Man on this channel. I miss that. Don't you miss that? Sure you do. Hey, this video is brought to you by Marvel Strike Force. That kind of counts, right? Guys, you already know Marvel. You probably already know this game. If you do, use that QR code on the screen or link in the description, get the game, and start getting yourself some free characters. If you're not familiar, let's get you up to speed. This is a squad-based RPG that features a ridiculous amount of characters and a ridiculous amount of ways to battle with them. You have story-driven campaigns, Blitz, Arena, Alliance War, a massive weekly alliance battle, raids, and Cosmic Crucible, where you can go up against other players in tournaments. You'll be saving the world from iconic villains and teaming up with the likes of Spider-Man, Wolverine, Captain America, all the favorites, and even some more obscure ones. If you're a new player, you can unlock up to 17 characters in the first 30 days. And if you're familiar with other certain Marvel games in the past, it might take to team synergy. Put simply, you power up your squad if you play certain characters together. Big X-Men fan? Make an X-Men team and the game will reward you for it. Really makes you think of the best tactical strategies down to every detail and decision, not to mention the ridiculous amount of love for the Marvel Universe overall. If there's a character or a variant or a costume of said character that you want to see, they probably have it, and they are constantly adding more. They pull from the comics, movies, shows, you name it, including Blade and his Night Stalkers. They also just introduced a new mode called Battle World. This is a PvE mode that you can take on with your alliance. I've been throwing around that word a lot. An alliance is exactly as it sounds. You can play with friends or just other players of the game. If you're any kind of Marvel fan, they have something for you here. And guess what? Got an offer for you. Use the offer code Halloween to get yourself 100 zombie Iron Man shards, 600,000 gold, and 480 L2 training modules. Just remember, link in the description or use that QR code on the screen. Thank you so much to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video, and let's keep going. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of interesting things here, but it's mostly in relation to what we learn about Trip and her culture. We are expanding on lore in ways that the game itself never gave us. And if this is the first time we see Trip speak, there are a lot of big reveals found in this comic, but it's all in service to Trip. And Knuckles is here as well. You might as well slap that ampersand permanently in front of his name, because this is yet again another Knuckles story where he takes the back seat while he's training somebody else, and then spoilers, ultimately doesn't really add much to the story that features him as the title character. I still love the writing style of Ian Flynn and the gorgeous art of Aaron Hammerstrom. The characterization is great, and the story itself in its own vacuum is very pleasant. All that is to be expected when it comes to classic era stories. This largely comes down to your own personal expectations, and if you know me, you know I'm extremely biased and connected to Knuckles, and I have been for all 30 years. So when I pick up a comic that's supposed to feature him, I expect something along the lines of the other 30th anniversary comic books for the other characters, something that really lets them shine. And this, unfortunately, is just here to platform Trip, a character that honestly probably wouldn't sell a comic on her own terms, which is a shame because I do love the character, but let's be honest, Superstars did not go over as well as I think Sega was hoping for, so seeing more Superstar storytelling is probably not going to go over super well for a lot of fans. But if you do love Superstars and you love this character and you wanted more story for Superstars, which I personally did, you might still have a fun time. And like I always say, even when I gripe, I love classic era stories, love the art, and again, on its own, not a bad comic book. So please go check it out for yourself first before you check out this video, because it does, if nothing else, expand quite a bit on the newly introduced elements of classic Sonic stuff that we saw in Superstars. There are cute references all over the place, and I just love the look and feel of this era of Sonic. But we'll get more into all of that at the end here. Let's quickly just go over the story itself, which is simple enough. Knuckles is hanging out on Angel Island, thinking to himself about how good of a job he's doing being the guardian of the Master Emerald and Angel Island. This is a direct reference to an old Tyson Hesse fan comic. I gotta admit, it's pretty cool seeing this made canon. The next page just briefly covers all the things Knuckles has accomplished since his life became entangled with Sonic and pals. Chaotix game is referenced, which is awesome. Of course, Mania is here as well, the Fang comic. If you've seen my older coverage, you know I'm happy to see Knuckles knocking the super out of Sonic, and of course, any Mecha Sonic reference is always welcome to me. I do love the extra detail of scuffs being on the robot, showing it has taken on Sonic prior to this point, because, if you weren't aware, Knuckles' campaign does take place after Sonic's. That said, this did make me think we haven't ever seen the Super Mecha Sonic battle in any other media outside of Sonic and Knuckles. Has been referenced, certainly, but I would love to see this animated or just in a comic book. But again, if you guys know my channel, you know I'm obsessed with Sonic robots and super forms, and I always want an excuse to see more of that stuff. You know, a good place to do that would probably be in a 30th anniversary comic. Shame they didn't do that here, maybe next 30th anniversary. Anyway, one last reference before the story kicks off is we get a chuckling Knuckles. Of course, this is a reference to that adorable little sprite we see all over Sonic 3. But that's where the references to Knuckles himself ends, as he notices he's passing over the North Star Islands, home of Trip and of course the setting of Sonic Superstars. And again, this is where I feel like a bit of a hypocrite. While I played Superstars, I had a fine enough time and I wanted more lore from the game. I was actually very frustrated with some things not being properly explained, and I certainly was hoping that Trip and this location would show up more often in satellite media. But as soon as I saw these islands, I was deflated. I'm biased, I know, but I really wanted to just spend time with Knuckles on Angel Island and really kind of dig into all of that lore. Again, I'll do more whining at the end of the video. Anyway, for the story itself, Knuckles just decides he can teach Trip a thing or two about being a guardian, since she is the guardian of the North Star Islands. So he floats off of Angel Island and lands right in front of Trip, who's just playing around with a bunch of animals. This is where we get the first bit of dialogue from Trip's mouth, which is hee hee this way. Like every other little girl in the Sonic franchise, she just acts like a little girl, except that maybe a little bit more timid, which is to be expected as that's how she expressed herself in the game. And the way she uses her helmet, I wish she was a turtle. I'm sorry, I'm being a whiny little baby. I just love turtles, and the Sonic franchise just kind of skirts around using them properly in a Mobian form. You know what? I will talk about that in my own weird video. I'm sorry. I like Trip. What's cool here is even though they had an adventure together, it's clear that Trip and Knuckles did not have a lot of interaction in Sonic Superstars. It was mostly between Trip and Amy. That's where we saw the closer connection. But here we see the immediate stark contrast between Knuckles as a guardian and Trip as a guardian. Trip is scared and timid. Knuckles is here to do something about it, telling Trip that she can't cower behind a helmet if her island is in trouble. She is, after all, the last of her kind. She has to protect her people's legacy and the island and blah blah blah, and Trip just looks on confused, telling Knuckles she's not the last of her kind, and she actually takes him to meet the rest of her tribe. This is easily the biggest reveal of this comic book. We did not see any other Sungazers when we played through Sonic Superstars, and we see a whole lot of them right here, all of them looking a lot like Trip. To be honest, outside of hedgehogs, we haven't seen a lot of just one specific species in this series. Knuckles, of course, is flabbergasted. He didn't see any of these guys when they were at the North Star Islands originally, and Trip quickly explains that she snuck away from Eggman and warned everyone to hide, regretting, as a guardian, not doing more. She felt pretty pathetic, being bullied to help the bad guys. And she looks over at Knuckles saying that probably never happened to him, but of course, he was just flat out tricked, so he's not gonna admit that. But here is where we meet Gramps, the elder of the tribe, an obvious parallel to Pachacamac, if I'm saying that name right. And while he does come off stern, he does clearly care a lot about Trip, scolding her for belittling herself, saying that's no way for a guardian to act, and she needs to stick to her training and wear her ceremonial armor with pride. And I think there's a little bit of a typo there, just have a quotation mark just hanging out at the end of that sentence. And Trip apparently doesn't like it very much, saying it's heavy and clunky, but Gramps tells her that she'll grow into it. Then Trip turns her attention to Knuckles, asking where his ceremonial armor is. What is it like? I love all these expressions Knuckles gets. We don't usually get to see him use his eyebrows this much, and shout out to Trey for pointing that out to me when we're talking about the Sonic video games. Knuckles embarrassingly admits he does not have one of his own. I also wanted to point out, because this happens all over the comic, the backgrounds use a 90s flair for a lot of their patterns. It's very cute. What's also very cute is how Trip idolizes Knuckles almost immediately. Gramps asks if Knuckles is a guardian like Trip, and she excitedly answers saying, yes, he is. He's super tough and experienced, and he's going to train me to be the best guardian ever. Knuckles, feeling a little insecure about himself with all this new information, nervously puffs out his chest saying, that's right. After training with me, she'll be ready for anything. And I do love that Trip just copies his pose. Gramps leers, potentially seeing through the fake confidence, but he just waves the kids off. And this is where we get into Trip's training. I will say this much, if I have to compare this story to the other Knuckles story where he has to train somebody, Knuckles at least least gives proper training to Trip as opposed to Wade. This at the very least gives us some insight into who he is as a guardian and as a character. This first lesson has him explaining that a good guardian needs to be able to patrol their territory quickly and efficiently. It's not just about speed, but also about maneuverability and knowing the terrain, knowing what your body can do and know your surroundings. That way you can move without thinking. You're in sync with yourself and everything around you. I like all of this because this reminds me a lot of how I interpreted Knuckles when playing through Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It almost describes the flow state of a classic Sonic game. Trip responds a little confused, saying she already is all those things, so Knuckles asks that she shows him. So they zoom off and we see a quick montage of them rolling around the North Star Islands like a classic game. And again, kind of shows some of the limitations of the two characters and their playstyles. Also love that they get the little spinny feet that classic Sonic usually gets. Glad it's not exclusive to him. But I will say though that the spinny feet on Knuckles makes him look just naked. Anyway, it shows that Trip can't crush rocks, which look like the cluster that you see all over the place in Sonic 3. But she can, however, get up the side of a wall much faster than Knuckles with her rolly ball technique. They move from Speed Jungle to Sky Temple, where Trip asks if they can take a break for lunch. Knuckles scolds her for the suggestion, saying they barely started. And when Trip whines, saying that it was a long run and she's tired, this is where lesson 2 comes in. A guardian must be extra resilient. Knuckles plans to build up her endurance by putting on her armor and sparring. Here, Knuckles gets to show off how quick he is on his feet. Trip cannot keep up with his movements, but it doesn't matter because when he goes in for a punch, he hurts his hand on her helmet. She gets turned around, trips over, and the helmet lands on his foot, meaning she clumsily won the fight, sort of. Knuckles is growing more and more irritated, picking her back up, putting her helmet back on, and saying it's time for round 2, but unfortunately, poor Trip has become completely overwhelmed with the intensity of the echidna, running off saying that she can't do this. Knuckles gets grumpy, not sure why she's acting like a little kid, and then sits down and reflects on his interactions with the rest of the classic Sonic cast. He remembers a camping trip he took with the others, and upon reflection, realizes that he made Amy cry and scolding Tails for hiding in a tent while there was lightning outside. I'll give this much to Knuckles. He does at least understand that his intensity can come off a bit much, but then asks himself how did he work through it with his other friends. And there we see the rest of the memory. Tails comes out of his tent the following morning, seeing that Knuckles stayed out all night guarding his tent. And he tells Tails that the fox made it through the storm, boosting up the little guy's confidence. We then cut over to Knuckles and Amy while he gives her advice on how to properly wield her Pico hammer. And we see the difference between what she can do on her own versus what she does after the advice of Knuckles, completely destroying a boulder. I do think this is a quick little moment showing Amy evolving into a capable character on her own terms, because you have to keep in mind, in the classic trilogy, she wasn't a playable character. She does eventually transition into one, and I think this moment here is showing at least a part of that transition, which is kind of cool. Upon thinking all that, Knuckles reminds himself that he can't just power through at full force. He has to focus on positives, be kinder, more uplifting, be a little bit more like, and then he's caught thinking about Sonic the Hedgehog. Have fun with that, shippers. He waves off the thought, saying that he's got to change his approach, but he's going to do it his own way. And while I'm not sure if this is a reference to Archie or not, seeing him walk towards the viewer does remind me a lot of those early Archie stories. It's at least a cool little piece of art. This whole comic obviously is full of that. Hammerstrom's stuff is gorgeous. We turn our attention to Trip, who is just drawing stuff in the sand with a stick, while two of the larger animals just look on, including that pig with the creepy, gross human hands. Knuckles floats down, startling Trip, who hides behind the two animals, try to step up to Knuckles, and he just shoves them aside. I love it. Knuckles apologizes, saying he had nobody to train him. He has no idea what it takes to be a good teacher. All he knows is all he knows, and most of that boils down to punch and punch harder. So Trip, after hearing that, decides to take a seat and have a conversation with the echidna. And he tells her things that a lot of you probably already know. He's been on his own the entire time, and all he knows is that he's supposed to protect the Master Emerald. Doesn't have his own armor, doesn't have his own people anymore. And when Trip asks what the Master Emerald does, Knuckles casually says nothing much, just makes Angel Island fly. Trip, of course, freaks out. It's such commonplace knowledge in the Sonic world, at least among the fan base. But back in the classic era, Angel Island was a big deal. Eggman didn't know it existed, Sonic didn't know it existed, so of course it makes sense that Trip is not aware of it either. Knuckles just casually points out to him saying, yeah, it's right there. And she's completely enamored and starstruck, knowing that Knuckles takes care of that entire island all by himself without any training or any armor. He also mentions that she guards a gemstone of her own, and she says yes, the black onyx. Trip says that that she's got something to show Knuckles. Then we get another quick montage, this time through Golden Palace. That of course is lovely because this was a reference to old Sonic 1 concept art, so I just love that zone already and I love seeing more of it. Interesting to note here that there is still a Badnik roaming around that Trip has to destroy. We did see some Eggman relics still on North Star Islands while Knuckles was passing over it, so it's likely that there's still a bunch of crap there. And as we find out later in the comic, yes, there is. Anyway, the two characters head over to the mural that we saw during the Knuckles level in Sonic Superstars. We don't really get a whole lot more information about it. A lot of the stuff you could interpret for yourself from just looking at it is just kind of explained here. Apparently, a lot of the history has been lost to time, but it shows Trip's ancestors protecting the Black Onyx and using the Chaos Emeralds to perform incredible feats. Those feats, of course, are references to the powers that you could unlock in Sonic Superstars. Knuckles points out that some of the pieces of the mural look a lot like her armor, meaning that her armor has been around for a very, very long time. She shows a bit more insecurity, but Knuckles reassures her that she's doing a great job and she's only going to get better, which leads into a hug, which makes Knuckles awkward and says that's enough training for now. He needs to get back to his island, but of course he does not know how to get back to his island. I do love that little joke. I love that he comes down onto the mainland without any real idea of how to get back. But this is where we learn that Eggman did leave other bits of junk, and Knuckles takes one of the Eggmobiles back up to Angel Island, thinking to himself that he set out to train the next generation of Guardians. Turns out he didn't have much to teach her after all, but he knew that Trip had what it takes to begin with. He is an excellent judge of character after all. A cute little note considering that he was tricked by Eggman. And the comic ends with Knuckles confidently guarding the Master Emerald yet again. Now, the comic is fine on its own. This is a lovely little expansion on the lore of Sonic Superstars. It was great to see Trip again. It was great to see her finally get some written dialogue of her own so we can expand on her character. And of course, it is great to see the parallels between Trip and Knuckles because we always knew they were there. Seeing that addressed here and seeing the two characters connect because of it was great. This in many ways establishes Trip as something of a sidekick to Knuckles, and I think that's absolutely precious. The art is great, and the expansion of the lore that was desperately needed for Superstars was very welcome, and all that is wonderful, but I still cannot get over how bad of a celebration this is for Knuckles himself. This can come down specifically to my own personal expectations. I know I get a lot of people mad when I talk any kind of trash or critique or whatever. I know a lot of folks really liked this because they really like Trip, and they're perfectly fine with the story as long as the character themselves is still respected and they're still acting like said character is supposed to act. That's how bad it's gotten with Sonic stuff sometimes. You're good to go as long as the character is the character. I guess all I can do is just try to explain why this is rubbing me the wrong way and the way it is, why I have the bias that I do. To me, and I think to a lot of others, Knuckles was the first character to properly bring in some really heavy world building into the world of Sonic the Hedgehog. I know they had a lot of crazy stuff for Sonic 1 and 2, a lot of stuff we didn't see here in America, but Knuckles brought in so much that it could not be ignored, and it didn't want to be ignored. Angel Island is an incredibly interesting environment. The Master Emerald alone brings in so much, and the mystery of Knuckles has never been thoroughly explored. I mean, it has a bit here and there between Sonic 3 Knuckles and Sonic Adventure, but ever since then, we've had what could have been the biggest push for Knuckles lore completely decanonized thanks to lawsuits with Ken Penders. And weirdly enough, when I think about it, and I want to shout out Ian Waffles because we were talking earlier about this comic, it feels like of the three big projects that came out in relation to Knuckles this year, Ken Penders is the one that gave him the most respect, which is a shame because, as you'll find out when I do cover the Larasu Chronicles, that's a pile of garbage. In fact, Knuckles is dead in those 13 pages that we got, but it is still more about legacy, about being a guardian, and all these other things that this comic tries to touch upon and what the Knuckles show tried to touch upon. But in both official bits of Sega-endorsed media, these fall completely short, which is a shame because this character has been lacking some really decent, juicy stories. And as much as we want to trash on Ken Penders, and Lord knows I do, he was one of the only ones really pushing for Knuckles stories back in the day, and he did set that expectation of investigating this character, his role in the world, and his legacy. All these elements that the games teased forever and just refused to touch anymore. When I look back on the other anniversary comic books, I at least see an adventure character specifically tailored to the growth of whatever character we're following. Tails and Amy got some really interesting stories that dug into the game history of said characters and pushed them forward in little ways. Same can be said here with Knuckles, but let's just call it for what it is. This is just an excuse to tell more stories in Sonic Superstars, and you know what? Eventually I'm gonna miss that, because when Sega can, they will just move away from Superstars completely, because I'm sure they'll be embarrassed about it, as they are with anything else that doesn't hit sales or critical blessings. But when you're selling this as a 30th anniversary celebration of a certain character, I expect this to be a celebration of that character. All of the cover art shows off Knuckles, it shows off Angel Island. We get lovely references to other things, that European box art, hell, the in-game graphics with Marble Garden, but it's all stuff that happens on Angel Island. And obviously that's not where the story takes place. If you're picking this up because you're a fan of this character and his legacy, that's not what you're getting here. It just isn't. And I refuse to believe there aren't some interesting stories to tell. I just expected more. I expected more from this team. I know Ian Flynn's a huge fan of Knuckles, and I'm sure he's got a ton of stories ready to tell about this character. I'm sure he's got some limitations. Art's still gorgeous, characterization's still great, everything I already said. I've seen a lot of people really excited about the stuff that's brought in for Trip. Do not let my wanting take away from that character. I just wish that the celebration of one character didn't have to come at the expense of another. Knuckles was a big deal when he first showed up. He was a big deal in all the comics he showed up. There's a huge legacy of great stories, or at least compelling ones. A lot of bad ones too, don't get me wrong. But you look at Archie, you look at Fleetway, you look at the comic book legacy of this character and what they can really do if they were allowed to explore him, and this is just nothing. It's just a lot of nothing. So yeah, fun little Trip comic, yet another calm, adorable slice of life tale that does connect these characters. This is not a bad comic book, but it is a bad celebration of Knuckles. I'm really sorry I'm sounding so negative. I just love Knuckles so much, and not a lot of these other characters get shows or they get their own comics, all this other stuff. But man, I'm getting so tired of this boy being disrespected the way he is. He's the worst playing character in Frontiers. He's quickly becoming the most boring character in the stories. I don't know. Just do better. I needed more than this after that train wreck of the Knuckles show. Glad some of you like it. Really cute and all. Tired of it. All right, that's it. I'm going. No, I'm not. Still have to thank the patrons. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. I really, really, really do appreciate it. And again, despite my conflicting feelings, if you go in with the right mindset, you probably have a better time than I did. Anyway, extra special thank you to these fine folks here. Kyle Winter, Cyrus the Skeptic, Joseph Duncan, Sonic 2 Blue. Music is still great, dude. Keep it up. Josh Strider, Trey Nobles, also an amazing musician. Keep it up. Get Wayne's stuff done. He's almost done with this video. Hatsworth, Tiny Jericho, Ginger Bob, Jack of All Spades, Tristan Trapp, Meekers, Bo Bennings, quote, Resident Fanboy, Miles the Prower, Singer J199, Sam Webster, Fishflop, Lucas Lipker, The Bad Pal, Jonathan Dobbs, Clover Chats, Chad, Mr. SP, Cecil the Glade, The Dark Neon, Stefan Plakanica, 3 Monic, Ram J Hall, Lenny X, Wayne is Boss, Lederick, David 20 Covers, David Kimmy, Trash Baphomet. Why'd I say it like that? Sometimes words just come out weird. You guys don't know how often I have to stop my recording because words just flop out of my mouth incorrectly, even though I'm trying to say them right. Where was I at? Trash Baphomet. There we go. Enerjack 5, Grayson Conager, Xerxes the Renegade Jin, Ken K, Ven 101, Paxton Busy, Sendarin 7, Bunny. Does it say Bunny or is it Bun Ooey? I can't tell with the cursive. I think it's Bun Ooey. Why? Twilord. Did you know this entire video was AI generated? Crimson Rose, Roxas the Cat, Godzilla, Makuda of Salt, Gleam the Anomaly, Alexander Watson, Neil Gampa, Conan Kudo, the Lex, the most powerful ship in the 2 universes, Kaido Prower, Spearmint, the Real Game Apologist, currently locked in a basement, this crazy video maker AI took over my house, send help, please hurry, Omega Man 21, Penn Adelaide, Daza S, Drabo 06, the world's most unironic 8.5 tail stand, MT Mecha, Gob, the RSI, Captain 7 Sol Survivor, there I go again, screwing up words, Captain 7 Sol Survivors were picked up by RMS Nux, Salem Hollow, kinda show off that Knuckles keychain you gave me, that thing is sick, Siegfried Wilder, the Burnyard, KB, Tenric Terror, Cho Henshin, and Sonicbot. Guys, thank you so much for the support. I greatly appreciate it, and if I sound weird today, it's because I'm just getting over a sickness. Very sorry about that. But yeah, there you go. I'll catch you all next time. Toot toot, Knuckle Warriors. Wait, should I say Echidna Warriors? It's like an Echidna tribe, right? Is that more appropriate? Do any of you even understand why I say toot toot? I do get that question sometimes. Sonic CD reference. Anyway, catch you guys later. Toot toot.